So question 1, where do you start? You've already identified that this is the pre-engagement stage, and you've put down the principles or the requirements from the auditing standard of what has to happen in the pre-engagement stage, what factors should be considered. Now you need to go into the question to see if any of these are highlighted so that you can either discuss them from this was considered or should have been considered, or I can clearly see they have not considered this and therefore it is a concern. If you didn't do this or didn't know what to do, then I expect that at a CTA level, you know that ISA 220 deals with the actual accepting of an engagement. So you should go to ISA 220, look for the paragraph, and then go to the application paragraphs to make sure you can pick up all the considerations so that you can now go back into the question to apply the question to the standard. Okay, so let's go to ISA 220 so that you can see what I'm saying you should do. So guys, I expect that you know that you need to come into ISA 220 when you're answering a question on pre-engagement. As you come into it, you've already flagged and highlighted the standard, and so you can see there that acceptance and continuance of client relationships and audit engagements is important. And then under our application paragraphs, we've highlighted ethical requirements, the acceptance and continuance paragraph, and then engagement resources. All right, so let's start with going to the acceptance and continuance paragraph in the requirements, paragraph 22. Paragraph 22 says the engagement partner shall determine that the firm's policies or procedures for the acceptance and continuance of client relationships and audit engagements have been followed. And we have highlighted in between those two, so I need to go to those application paragraphs to see which paragraph was highlighted to help me with the acceptance and continuance. So let's go there. So I come to the application paragraphs for the acceptance and continuance of client relations and audit engagements, and I come down to A50 where I've highlighted the information that is going to assist the engagement partner in determining whether they should accept or continue with a relationship or audit engagement. So this is what needs to be considered. The integrity of the owners, the client, whether there is sufficient and appropriate resources on the audit team side to perform the engagement, whether management of the clients have acknowledged their responsibilities with this engagement, whether the audit team is competent and capable, and whether there is sufficient time. And if we are continuing any information that has arisen in previous engagements or in the current engagement, which would affect whether we want to continue with this engagement. So I have to look at the information in the scenario and see if anything links to any of these factors. Now, I don't have examples here, guys. This is just an overall of what needs to be considered. So if I need examples to help me find in the scenario issues or concerns or considerations that link to these, I have to go into further paragraphs. So for the integrity and ethical values of the principal owners, I have to go into ISQM1, okay, the quality management standard for the firm. Sufficient and appropriate resources and whether the team has the competence and capabilities, including sufficient time. I've highlighted the application paragraphs under human resources. So I'm going to have to go to the application paragraphs in this standard for human resources. Okay, and then where the management have acknowledged, I'll have to look at in the scenario, have they acknowledged? There's no examples for that. And significant matters that may have arisen during the current or previous engagement, there's no examples of that. So let's go into the HR to see examples of how we can determine if the engagement team is competent and capable with sufficient time and sufficient resources. So under our engagement resources, you scan to find what you have highlighted, and right there, A71, competence and capabilities of the engagement team. So what are the things that need to be considered? The understanding and practical experience with audit engagements of a similar nature, the understanding of the professional standards and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. If there's any expertise required, or IT, based on the scenario, they've got a computer information system, then potentially we need expertise in IT or automated tools or techniques to help the engagement team. The engagement team's knowledge of the relevant industries, the ability to apply professional skepticism, and the understanding of the firm's policies or procedures. So I'm going to look in the scenario for anything that indicates that there's a concern here with the competence and capabilities because they don't have understanding of the industry, the standards, or any practical experience, or there's no budget for expertise. Or the opposite. They do have an understanding, there are sufficient resources, there is sufficient time because there isn't a tight deadline. They do know the industry and the type of engagement. Then we've got to look at the client's integrity. And I've said there is no assistance here. I have to go into ISQM1. So let's go there. So I come into ISQM1, starting at my contents page, which is flagged. Look down at my requirements that has been highlighted. And there I've got acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements highlighted. In addition, I've got the application paragraphs for that highlighted. So I'll start off by going to the requirement paragraph. But if I don't find what I need to, I'll go to the application paragraphs. Okay, so let's go to paragraph 30. Paragraph 30, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements, says the firm shall establish the quality objectives that address the acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements by looking at the integrity and the ethical values of the client, the firm's ability to perform the engagements in accordance with professional standards and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Okay, we're looking at the integrity and the ethical values of the client, so we're going to A67. A67, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements. If I go down just a little bit, I can see examples of factors that you have to consider that indicate whether the integrity and ethical values of the client are acceptable. So, the nature of the entity, including its complexity of its ownership, the nature of the client's operations, the attitude of the principal owners, and any aggressive interpretation of accounting standards. If they are aggressively concerned with maintaining the fee as low as possible, if they are limiting the scope, if there are indications of money laundering or criminal activities, what is the reason for the new appointment and not reappointing the previous firm, business reputation of related parties. These are the ethical considerations. So in the scenario, if there are any indications that any of these are applicable, we can then go and say there is a concern with the client's integrity. So let's go back to ISA 220 to finish pre-engagement. So we have now done the factors to consider with regards to the integrity of the client and whether they've got sufficient and appropriate resources and considerations with regards to the engagement team. One thing that I haven't addressed or that has actually been left out of the requirements here is ethical considerations for the audit team. And that's because it's addressed as an entire own paragraph, therefore it is applicable from before accepting an engagement all the way through the engagement. So that's why it's been removed from just pre-engagement, because it's relevant throughout. We have highlighted the application paragraph for ethical requirements. So let's go there. So paragraph A38 says, ISA 200 requires the auditor to comply with the relevant ethical requirements, including those pertaining to independence. So if you're not sure what they are, then you need to go to ISA 200. If we continue down, we've highlighted here, it says you've got to identify and evaluate the threats to compliance with the relevant ethical requirements. And A44 specifically says, look at the code. The Code of Professional Conduct gives you identification and evaluation of threats. And there's a couple of examples that are here. However, you need to go into the code then to see if there are any examples of situations that are addressed in the code that affect the ethical requirements. What are those ethical requirements? Once again, you need to go into the Code of Professional Conduct, where you will see the 5 fundamental principles: integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, professional competence and due care, professional behavior, and then for an auditor in public practice, independence is added as an ethical consideration. Okay, let's go into the scenario to see if we pick up any of these issues. So in the scenario, and I'm looking for anything that indicates or links to client integrity, the resources, the staff, the timing for the audits, and the ethical requirements. Anything that could affect the auditor's compliance with the ethical requirements. So the first thing here, I've got a note here, time, just to see that we accepted or were appointed on the 1st of February for 28th February. So I don't really have any real indication there with regards to time. So I keep moving on. I've got here, the previous auditors have resigned, so there is a vacancy. So that is a consideration. It's not a concern, but it is something that we need to consider when deciding whether to accept or not. So I can go and put that down immediately. Okay, and now that we are coming into the scenario, guys, I think it's very important to actually set up your scenario so that you don't forget points. So I would go, number 1, the following should have been considered prior to accepting the engagement. And I put a semicolon. Now, I want to actually put down headings so that I include everything. So I'm going to put here client integrity. And then I'm going to leave half a page to discuss any considerations or concerns with regards to client integrity. And then I'm going to say the auditor's competence, capabilities, including time and resources, as a heading, and leave half a page. And then the auditor's compliance with the ethical requirements. And I leave half a page, and then I'm going to have other, the previous auditors resigned, therefore there is a vacancy. And I can cross that off. Then I've got your scope limitation, management integrity could be lacking because they have asked the auditors not to contact the previous auditors. So I'm going to say it's a concern that the client has requested that we do not contact the previous auditors Therefore, there could be a scope limitation. And I'm going to cross that off. Then I've got here the previous auditors resigned due to insufficient staff. So there's a concern that we may not have sufficient staff if the previous auditors who enjoyed a long association resigned due to insufficient staff. So without going to any other information in the scenario about our sufficiency of resources, I'm just going to use that point. I'm going to say there's a concern that we could have insufficient staff if the previous auditors who enjoyed a long association as auditor resigned due to insufficient staff. And guys, why did I say that? Well, think about it. If you have had a long association, you know the client, you know you've audited the closing balances, so you've got the opening balances already in check. You've done a lot of the work from using prior year experience. And so if they have insufficient staff now, and all of that work has already been addressed, there's a concern that we are going to have insufficient because we need to now still get evidence over opening balances, and we need to go and understand the client, something that they never had to do year on year. Okay, the next thing I've got here is there's no engagement letter. So I can immediately go and put that under other, no engagement letter, and there should be an engagement letter. So it's a concern. As there should be for each engagement. And I'm going to cross it off. And then I've got here, I understand the industry, but I don't have anything yet to discuss any concerns or considerations with the industry. I've got that they can pay the fee because they have gained market capital and they are the #1 home video gaming brand. So if they're the top of their market, we would assume that they should be able to pay the fee. So under other, I will say they should be able to pay the fee because they've had rapid growth, increase in market share, market capital, and are the #1 in their field. Next, I've said big size, and then I have made a link. So my link came down here where I said we've got 3 members on the audit team, and that is insufficient for the size of the engagement. So I need to go now and discuss my concern with my number of resources. So I'm going to say there's a concern that there is insufficient staff for the audit, as there are only 3 members for a client of 1,000 employees. and I've addressed that and that now. Next, I said the IT system and whether we are capable of auditing this IT system. And so I need to quickly go down here to where I've discussed my staff to see whether there's any indication that we may not be. And I can see that I've said that they are inexperienced. So that's a point to say that they may not be able to use computer-assisted audit techniques because they haven't experienced using them before. I've also said here there's no budget, so they maybe can't get an expert, IT experts if required for this system. So I'm going to say there's a concern that our staff do not have experience to audit IT system or use CATs, which is the computer-assisted audit techniques, because of this IT system. I'm also going to discuss the fact that there's a concern that there's no budget for the use of an IT expert for their IT system testing. So I've addressed the IT system, I've addressed the inexperience for IT specifically, and experts, budget is a concern. Then I've got here, no practical experience. This is the first client. So they don't have any knowledge of the industry, of the regulatory requirements, and because, once again, they're all junior staff, they won't have had any experience of audits in a similar nature. So I'm going to say it's the first audit of a client of this nature. Therefore, there's a concern that staff do not have knowledge or experience of a client in a similar nature, or knowledge or experience of the industry, regulations, and the regulatory requirements and the professional standards. And I can cross those off now. Then I've got, this could be a threat to professional competence and due care because they don't have budgets for a manager, and so they might not have the ability to spend the time they need on this engagement, and therefore they don't have the professional competence required. There is a concern with professional competence and due care because there is no manager and there is a limited budget. So therefore, if you need to get the assistance, you can't. They're trying to reduce the fee or keep it as low as possible, which could result in less work. Okay. I cross it off, and there we've got trying to keep the fee as low as possible could be a link with regards to the client lacking integrity. So it's a concern that the client is trying to keep the fee as low as possible. Therefore, maybe trying to hide things for the auditors not to pick them up. Cross it off, and here I've got the partner is the company secretary. So that must be a threat to independence. And guys, I know we haven't done the CPC, and that's why I haven't answered other points specifically aligning with the CPC. But this is something that I want you to see and go, this must be a concern. It's the partner. He's doing something else that could influence his independence. So I want to go to the CPC. Guys, I'm going to take you to the actual section, which is 523, but just know you will only be properly tested on the CPC once we have completed the CPC. Section 523, serving as a director or officer of an audit client. And it says this creates self-review and self-interest threats. So, what is the service? Are you serving as a company secretary? It says a partner shall not serve as a company secretary unless practice is specifically permitted, management makes all decisions, and the duties are routine and administrative. Okay, in the scenario, they say it is not administrative based, therefore you should not be able to. The threat, self-interest, and self-review are too significant to independence. So under the ethical requirements, I'm going to say it's a concern that the audit partner is also the company secretary for the client. Therefore, there is a self-interest or self-review threat to independence. It is significant because it is not purely administrative based. Therefore, should not have both roles. He's going to be the partner, then he shouldn't be the company secretary. And I can cross that off. And then we get into the staff. And we can see that the staff have been given lots of work because there's only 3 of them for such a big audit. Okay, we have already mentioned it as a group. Now I want to discuss it more specifically. So under my resources, I'm going to say that the 3 junior clerks have been assigned the entire audit and have, in some cases, only a day to complete the audit for specific balances and transactions. Insufficient. And then I can talk about the deadline. There's insufficient time to complete the entire audit with a deadline on 31st of March. And we can cross that off. Okay, let's do question 2.